edit later. It's like not
FLV.
proprietary.
Perfect.
Sort of.
All right, we'll just go ahead and get started. I have a wonderful PowerPoint. Don't look at my slides yet. I tried to move it, but I couldn't grab it fast enough. So now y'all seen it. Let me get this out of the way. And can I close that? Is it safe?
For sure.
Panel, makes sense. Yeah, it's recording. All right. So this is my knowledge share on AngularJS. For the guys on the phone that haven't done these before, I think we've had like 5 or 6. We basically just, if somebody's interested in sharing something, they put together a presentation, share it, talk about it. We had one on Knockout last time. We had one on ASP.NET MVC.
Unity.
Had one on Unity. Dave did one on. Was it? What? I did? Yeah, you did one on ISC a while ago. DI maybe? I don't know. Same thing. I do remember that.
5 years ago.
Okay, well, whatever.
Workflow.
Give you some credit. Workflow, yeah. Anyway, this is on AngularJS, and the subject of the invite was a little sensationalist, future of web development. I just want to get people excited. I am really excited by this. I think it's really cool. It's a new approach.
Awesome, CJ.
Yeah, it's similar to some other frameworks in a way, but I think what Angular is providing is pretty unique. So let's go. What is AngularJS? It's an open source MVW framework, and MVW I write because that term seemingly is getting more cover or getting more ground and getting more popular. The W stands for whatever you want it to be, because MVC, MVVM, all the other MVP stuff, it's all kind of the same, so MVW kind of just covers it all. And there's also you have some options when you're working in Angular. You can kind of roll it how you like. The project is maintained by Google. It was written originally by 2 guys, I think, that work at Google. And there are currently 3 maintainers on it, and they all have very foreign names that I cannot pronounce. So the framework is written for the browser, so you're going to use your standard technology, HTML, CSS, JavaScript. There's nothing new. You can use CoffeeScript if you're weird, if you like to do that. You can probably use TypeScript or any other transcompile languages. It's designed around single-page applications, which this SPA term's also, getting pretty popular. And I put an asterisk there because it really doesn't mean anything. It's not limiting in any way. You can have a corporate website with and roll it with an SPA. Like Twitter, for example, is perfect to show what you can do with an SPA. All of their requests are JSON requests, and they're using URL rewriting with pop state, so you just can't even tell, and it's seamless. But it is a single-page application, but it feels like a traditional standard website where the entire view changes. To do MVC, I was going to say gave a ringing endorsement to Angular, but I've since heard the creators use this phrase as well, and they describe it as what HTML would have been if it had been designed for the web app, or for WebEx, which is definitely true, and hopefully I can convey that here. So, a little bit of history before I get into things. In the mid-90s, early 2000s, people were writing HTML with a little bit of JavaScript inside the HTML, and they were like, wow, check out what I could do with this dynamic web page. This is the coolest thing in the world. And then around mid-2000s, maybe before, people got up in arms and said, this is ridiculous. You need to separate your stuff out. You need to keep your JavaScript in your JavaScript and keep your HTML in your HTML, just like you keep your CSS in your CSS, or your styles in your CSS. So there was this different approach. This is the jQuery implementation of the same thing up here. And now, in 2012, you've got these AngularJS guys coming back, and they roll up and say that, hey, maybe the original way is the best way. So if I can sort of describe what the core fundamentals are of Angular, I guess this is sort of out of order. So their really core belief is that a declarative approach to writing UI is the best approach. And when you want to do business logic, then you should write imperative code. And I'll go into that in a little bit. Their framework also reduces a ton of complexity in traditionally very complex web apps, where you have just stuff all over the place. You have the server rendering things, you have the client HTML, which may have come from the server dynamically or may be modified dynamically after it gets to the client, and style sheets doing all these things. So they really try to bring them all together and sort of give each technology I guess let each technology do their thing without kind of muddying it's a good word, without messing up with. No, let me just move on. That's not going anywhere. So the declarative approach to UI and the imperative approach to business logic really decouples DOM manipulation from business logic, which what you see in JavaScript these days is a mixture of both. You've got a ton of DOM manipulation just because you want the application to look nice and flow nice, and a ton of business logic saying that, you know, the user has to input these types of things and you can't add more than whatever. So decoupling that makes it for a really clean and nice experience. It also decouples client and server-side stuff. So there's no more server-side views. With Angular, there's no more Razor. There's no more PHP rendering things from the server, data from the server inside of the HTML. It's very clean. The framework is fully featured, so it does AJAX templating, data binding, routing, URL rewriting, DOM manipulation, and more, all built in. So you're not going to go out and grab other frameworks like jQuery, for example. It's got a jQuery built in. You don't need to grab SAMI to do URL rewriting or pop state changing. And it's entirely testable, which is pretty cool, which I actually have not gotten into yet, but I'm interested in seeing how it works.
Can I just real quick?
Yes.
You said twice pop state changing.
Pop state. Pop state is the HTML5 way to change the URL. If you've ever seen Twitter of old, they got the hash bang in the URLs, such that when you change the URL, they monitor for when the hash changes. Everybody knows what I'm talking about? Okay. You know how you have, we love this. When you do, is that right? Yeah, that's right. When you do that, it can jump to the page, right? That was traditionally what anchors with hashtags were for. What people have done is you can wrap a watcher around your location and watch for changes in the hash and then make actions. So people wrote a ton of implementations to do this, and it was a pretty cool way to do a single-page application.
Hit back, it's actually going to go to the previous state as opposed to the previous page.
And the page will, or the code will recognize that a change was done and then actually execute something to change the view. So that was really a hack. You're really trying to trick the browser into doing something you want. So with HTML5, there's a pop state event that you can bind to or subscribe to. It's an event. And check for changes, and you can use normal URLs to change the state of your application without actually going back to the server.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes, no problem. So it's a testable, but I have not looked into that. It uses Jasmine and I think Testacular,
Which is now called Karma.
Is it? Okay, if you guys have heard of it. I have only heard the names. I've not actually looked into it.
I thought it was testicular.
Oh, they changed it.
It's a different thing.
Actually, the Angular walkthrough is pretty cool, and they walked you through setting some of that stuff up. It's not as straightforward as one might hope.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of assumptions in there, but I've walked through it, and David has also walked through it. And you essentially get the benefits of real-time unit test running if you use the two things, a couple of things that they have in place.
Yeah.
Karma, their test runner, and Jasmine is the end unit of
Right. That's what you're writing your tests in, right?
Exactly. So kind of like we bought nCrunch to have the real-time unit test. It's a little more decoupled, right? It's not straight in your IDE, but you still get those same benefits.
It's in
essentially it essentially does a file system watcher.
It's in WebStorm.
Yeah, well, it can be in
It's not in your Visual Studio, but yeah.
Right.
But I mean, you get all the test results in WebStorm? Because when I did it, it was...
Sure, I thought that I was seeing that. Maybe I wasn't. I
What
thought
we've
I saw
seen
a demonstration.
It's in a separate
in
command
the console app.
I thought I saw some UI, maybe it was a Mac UI that wasn't WebStorm. So,
sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine. So I'm going to try to bumble through the difference between declarative and imperative, and I think Cameron will appreciate sort of where they're going, because Cameron's complaint has always been that you know, JavaScript middling with HTML just seems dirty. So hopefully he will be satisfied finally by this. So HTML for UI is very declarative. So and I stole these examples from the Angular guys because they were so perfect. So if you want to render a hello world example in HTML, it's very simple. You say I have a paragraph, and inside of that paragraph, I want to show hello world. If you're writing this example in JavaScript, it becomes much uglier, and it's very imperative because you're now changing the state of something else through this sequence of events. And we don't need to go into this, but basically it's checking if it's IE and needs to do attach event or add event listener because IE is not standard. And then when mouse.
You said this earlier, Kevin.
Yeah. When the load event is fired, we basically find an ID, find an element by this ID and set the inner text or text content. Text content is the new way, not the new way, but the proper W3C way to do setting the text and the elements. So we'll get into that more as well when we see code to talk about really what we're doing with declarative UI. Complexity reduction. If you've ever tried to use Twitter Bootstrap to do tabs, or really any framework, you're writing a lot of HTML, and then you're writing some jQuery to kind of make that work. Twitter Bootstrap is basically a CSS-driven tabs approach, but if you want to show one by default, you kind of need to execute some code as well. So Angular provides a way to do custom tags and really make it much more obvious that you're doing tabs. This is, again, back to tricking the browser with the pop states or with the hash bang stuff. This is really tricking the browser into creating tabs, whereas this is a much more streamlined approach. And of course, it's not as simple as this. You write a tabs, they call them directives. You write a tabs directive and a pane directive to show these things. But at the end of the day, if you have pulled in some sort of third-party library for Angular to add these kinds of features, or someone on your team has already written them, it is literally as simple as this. So time for some source code. We're going to write some stuff. So before we get into anything, Angular has two. That doesn't want to collapse. Has two kind of main things that you want to get into, and it's data binding and templating, and that's how you get your declarative UI going. So I'm going to breeze through this real quick. Just like with Knockout, as we saw in Joshua Kincaid's knowledge share, you are doing data binding through these attributes in your code. So if I want to first name, if you want to display a first and last name, you're going to use the ngModel attribute to bind this is going to be a variable. So ngModel is a directive that Angular provides for data binding, and you are binding this field, this input text field, to a first name property variable. For that, of course, you'll want to include Angular script.
Jelena?
Yes.
I mean, I know, but for someone who doesn't know, how is it that you're editing? What are you editing here on the left, and it's automatically updating on the right? Can you
WebStorm. It's JetBrains WebStorm.
Oh, I know. Just for
yeah. So Dave doesn't know.
People.
So there's a Chrome plugin.
There's a Chrome plugin, and this thing supports it. It's live editing. This thing was like $12 last year on some crazy sale, so I bought it. I know a couple other people did. And I haven't really used it until I started writing Angular because it doesn't support anything but HTML and JavaScript.
Okay.
What it does is live edit anything, and it's a little wonky. It tries to be smart and just update what you've just changed without pulling in other references. So sometimes you need to refresh if you need some dynamic changes in there.
How do you have it hooked up to Chroma?
There's a Chrome extension that you install, and then you turn live edit on, and it says it's going to debug it and change it.
So it's both the Visual Studio and the Chrome.
WebStorm.
That's
Or
not it.
okay,
Visual
WebStorm,
Studio.
and there's the Chrome plugin. They're working together.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's pretty neat for fleshing things out, but it does have its issues.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah,
So
you guys might not know.
You were right.
So these variables here that we're setting, that we're data binding to, are going to be bound to a scope. And a scope is a big thing in Angular. When you are running an Angular application, you want to specify somewhere in your DOM that this set of code is going to be Angular. And you do that with an ngApp attribute. Usually just put on the HTML because that's the easiest thing. There are other ways to get further child scopes, and you can nest scopes, and they can go up the chain and bounce chain and talk with each other. But for the sake of this, you do a first name, you do a last name, and then you can use those in different ways. So the easiest way to do it is just templating, and again, okay, so that works. So you can just type your first and last name, and as you type, it updates this template. So that's how data binding works. It's pretty simple. The values within these brackets are not just variables, they're Angular expressions. So you could do, it's kind of like JavaScript Lite. You could do certain things in it, like concatenation. I think you can parse int as well, but there are other things that you just can't do. You can't just call JavaScript functions. You can just call functions on your scope, which we'll get into in a second, but that's kind of the basics of the data binding.
So Angular is somehow like looking at the document and finding that bracket syntax you put in there.
Yeah.
That's clearly like the browser doesn't want to see that.
Exactly. As soon as you type ngApp and include Angular, it's going to traverse your DOM and find anything that it needs, anything that it's aware of, and wire it up.
And the browser never sees it? Or
So that's an interesting thing. If you refresh fast enough, you'll kind of see it flicker there a minute, so it cleans it up. So what you can
so
do...
it's hiding it. It's parsing it, doing
Yeah.
stuff with it, and then hiding it.
So what you could do is you can put your script at the top, but that's not recommended because then your site is waiting on it. There are some other tricks as to where you would wrap this in a hidden element, or you can wrap it... But yeah, you can wrap it in a hidden element and then show it later. I think probably the best thing is to just set this at the top if you're going to do a very simple application, which I'm showing you right now. But the next thing I'm going to do will kind of change that so that you don't have to worry about that problem anymore. That's data binding. So if you want to set up an application and do it the right way and actually work within the framework, you're going to want to create a module. So I'm going to include a JavaScript file, and I'm going to modify that JavaScript file and create this application. So you created a module by calling angular.module, and you give it a name. And as soon as you give it a name, your code will no longer work if you just said ngApp. So you need to specify that this is the module. This is going to be controlled by the module that you're going to create. So should we call it app for now? And you can pass in dependencies. Angular is big on the dependency injection. So I guess they do that for testability and also so you can inject other things and overwrite implementations and things. So you create a module, and the first thing you want to do is, if you're writing a single-page application, which generally you will be with these with Angular, is specify routing. So there is create a variable. So you configure your module, and you can wire up a bunch of configuration in the config block. And again, this function here will also take dependency injected functions, or arguments rather. So it's interesting to note that if I send in something that it doesn't recognize, it's going to throw an error that says unknown provider. So there's no such thing as a route provider X. So it's actually investigating this function that you pass into it and reading the arguments out of it and passing things that have already been registered. So Angular by default gives you a route provider. You could create other providers as well to do different things. But quickly, I'm going to suss out the routes. If I can remember off the top of my head here without checking an example. I believe you say when the user is navigating /, you want to give it, or you want to tell it to pull in a template URL that is, there's a bunch of options. HTML and a couple more of these for my examples. I'm going to make a quick calculator, and I'm going to show you a more real-world example of some categories. Category management and COP and how it reduced a lot of complexity. So when they hit calc, I want it to go there. When they hit categories, I want it to go there. And each of these also needs a controller, which I forgot to add, which is just a string. So I'm going to say home controller. And calc controller. WebStorm is sometimes frustrating with what it wants to do for you, and what you don't expect it to do for you. Believe that is right, and then at the end of this statement, you can say otherwise. If it gets something crazy, you could just redirect back to /. And I believe that that will give us no errors, so we can get rid of that now. So we're going to set up some navigation, and like I said, it does support pop state, but it's a little bit tricky because you have to, you have to turn it on, which is really simple. It's just including another provider and setting the HTML5 mode to be on. But it gets trickier because you kind of need your server set up to accept any request, such that if I did cast here, it wouldn't go to a 404, but it would take that request and still route it back to the index file. If anybody's ever set that up, you kind of know what I'm talking about. So set up a couple links here. Category.
What you're doing now, you have
No, the HTML5 thing. If you want to do pop state, if you don't want to hash in your URL, you have to do some extra server-side work to route all requests under this directory back to this one file. Here. And then calc to calculator. So come in here, now we have links, and when you click on links, the top changes, but so we see some content. Always fun troubleshooting. Right. So these links, of course, just change the URL because that's how anchors work. But if you want, Angular to be observing them and actually doing something with them, you need to use an ngView directive, and you can use it as an element like that. As you can see, it just threw it in there. Now I'm at the home page, now I'm at the categories page. Or if you want to stylize it a little better, you could wrap it in a div and use the directive as an attribute. And now you have your single page application going on. So if you're interested,
You can use the data name to prevent the NGs.
you can, yeah. There's like 30 ways to do the Angular directive if you want to be HTML5 compliant, like if you want to run your HTML against a validator and be happy that it knows what you're talking about. There's data, there's X, there's like 30 ways to do it. I don't Oh, Lord. That's ridiculous. Let's take that out. All right, so how it works is when you refresh the page, it's going to pull in site, basically the additional request, the CSS that I've included here, Angular, app, and the first view, which is home.html. So when I click on categories and it uses the send view, all it's doing is pulling in categories.html, making an AJAX request to pull it in, and then rendering it. And Calculator does the same thing. And once you've done that, it caches them, so it doesn't need to do them. It knows about those templates. It's assumed that they are not dynamically generated on the server, so there's no reason to get them again.
Unless you tell it otherwise, probably, right?
Yes, and I'm not sure how you do that. I can imagine there's probably something in here that says don't cache, but I don't know. I've not looked into that. So it's pretty cool how that works. Yeah. Sorry for the people on the phone, but there's pizza here. People are hungry, so there may be some shuffling and noise about while people are getting pizza.
Just real quick, we got 3 kinds, cheese and beef, pepperoni and extra cheese, and pineapple.
Pineapple, please.
Smash it into the microphone.
Here, we'll just set it next to the mic so you can smell it.
Yummy.
Right. Yeah, there we go. 3D printed pineapple. What? The food replicator. It's Star Trek.
Prototype works.
That's ridiculous.
They've actually printed out a slider of paper.
3D printing food.
I get the point of the,
I want a ham sandwich. I'm going to print out ham slices.
I want a hamster sandwich.
I'd be fine with a cube of paper like that. Now, let's be able to use
I know.
So boring stuff.
There's so much that you have to remember about like the value fix you can do it and do dash. And the templates are bracket.
You're saying for
It's like learning
presenting or for you coding?
No.
For someone coding?
For some coding.
Okay. Oh yeah, it's a framework. You got to learn a framework. Or don't.
Yeah, I guess up to this point everything's been, you know what you know. You just need to apply it via different syntax. This is you've got to do different paradigms. Yeah.
Sorry. I was telling Jason this morning that I think I'm in love with Angular.
Dude, it is awesome. It keeps me up at night. It's a little crazy. Alright, so these guys are I'm going to start moving on. Kind of roll through an implementation of a calculator really quick just to show you some things, how Angular works. So I am going to, again, we've seen this data binding thing.
We got a mushier one in the other conference.
Very mushy.
And it's like moist in here with the air conditioning. Like I got the paper off the printer and it was like limp. It's ridiculous. Alright, anyway, back to code. Chris, could you kick that cable when you have a minute?
Oh no.
Oh no. What are you doing?
Sorry.
So we're going to do some simple math operations, adding 2 numbers. If you guys need any explanation, you can hit me up after. Right. I needed to find a calculator. So this when statement, when we went to calc, said view calc, and if you'll notice in the console window, there's a bunch of errors. That's because I did not, now I cannot get rid of that. I did not define a controller. So you define a controller on your module by calling module.controller. Give it a name. We said calc controller, and you want to pass it a function. And again, I'm going to pass it the scope thing, which is going to be injected. You can pass it any kind of dependency that you wanted that has that is registered, basically. If you want to register a service to do data calls back and forth, you can pass in your own stuff there. But this scope thing is back, and we can kind of put more structure. So the other example I showed you with the data binding head virtually no structure. So this is going to be a little bit more structured application where you're going to have a controller, you're going to have a view, and they're going to have things that they do, where the view is just worried about showing the UI, and the controller is worried about business logic. So I'm going to define defaults for these X and Y parameters by setting properties on the scope. And the cool thing about this is that if you've used Knockout, you have to do weird things in Knockout called observables, where it kind of to me anyway, it kind of ruins the idea of a model, because it's no longer a simple model, a simple class with simple properties. It's this class with a bunch of methods that you call. So if you want to set a person's first name, you have to call the first name method. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me.
Wasn't it a performance thing?
You mean they did that for performance reasons?
Yeah, so that part of your model, there would be things that would have to be constantly kept tabs on and other things.
I would assume, but I mean, Angular's here, and they are binding to simple types, and you can set simple types, and it just works. There is, if you get into the guts of Angular, there is a digest cycle. So when any sort of event takes place inside of a scope, it has to digest all the changes, and it does simple dirty checks and says, hey, did anything change? And sometimes it goes to a couple cycles of that, even though like only one thing changes, so it needs to check everything else because there are all these dependencies. But from what I've seen, there have never been any issues, and obviously I'm using Chrome, so maybe in older browsers with their slower JavaScript engine might run into some issues, I'm not sure. So we have some sort of defaults here, and you can see that it's actively changing, as you saw before, via this template thing here. So you could go a little step further, and I think
Multiplication?
I pre-wrote this out. Yes, not only multiplication, but division.
No, stop.
Are you looking? Are you looking at this? And subtraction all at once, and it just updates as you go. It's very interesting. So this is, kind of simple. Yeah, it's just kind of magic. I just want to kind of show that simple example. But for the there's another thing to mention here as well. There's this concept of filters, which is also another kind of bit of magic. So if we wanted to say x plus y equals x plus y, and kind of show the user what's going on, we can do that. And if we wanted, let's say we were in a shopping cart, and we wanted to show nicely formatted money, we just throw a filter on there, and you basically pipe in, use pipe, use your filter, excuse me, dealing with some snot issues there, and it just sort of magically works. Now you have,
This is really choking.
it's actually internationalized filters here. So if you set your whatever to show pounds or euros, it would show pounds and euros. And this is all built in as well, and you can define your own filters. And there's things like uppercase and lowercase, and you kind of do whatever you want there. So
You're saying filter, but it sounds more like a formatter.
it is called a filter in the Angular vocabulary, and I'll show you why for our other reasons. But you're sort of filtering the value, but yes, it is formatting it in this case.
Cool.
Yes. So because we have a demo here, and I need to show, how Angular works and working with a calculator, we're going to kind of blow all that away and make a simple button, just for the sake of a demo. So for the sake of a demo and time, I'm just going to use thumb and product. So now we have buttons here, and we want to wire them up to something. So we're going to use that ngClick thing that we saw in the slides. And we're going to say calculate sum and calculate product. So by default, these are not going to do anything because those are not defined. And again, this ngClick is expecting an Angular expression, not JavaScript. So even if you defined calculate sum as a global scope, which I would highly advise against, it would not work. So on your scope, you have to define these things. Calculate sum function. And you don't need to pass in the x and y. You could pass in x and y because it would parse it and know that these are variables within your scope. But since you're already in your controller, you know what x and y are. So you could simply say result equals scope.x plus scope.y. And then you can see here I've created a new property on my scope. So if I wanted to go the long route, not sure where that dollar sign came from, you could just do it like this, and now you have 5 plus 6 equals 11. But again, for the sake of the demo, let's get a little bit more crazy, and let's actually keep history of all the calculations that the user has input. So we're going to set this calculate sum function up to set history, var, take the result. Let's keep this clean after all. And then we want to push an object into this history array with the result of the operation, what the operation was, and the description spelled correctly of the operation. So scope.x plus scope.y plus equals result.
So in Angular you don't need semicolons?
In Angular you don't need semicolons. Where
Line 12.
Line 12. That's what you were saying. Got it. Yeah. Yeah. So this will push an object into this history array. And one of the awesome things about Angular is that you can literally just dump arrays out generally for troubleshooting purposes. I'm not sure why you would want to do this in a real-world application. So you could just I guess just render this to see what your object looks like such that you can make decisions while you're developing. But what we want to do with it is show the history in a nice list. So we'll do a list, and we will show, we'll use the ngRepeat directive. ngRepeat basically iterates over an array or collection. So you can say, if you use a for each loop, which I hope most of you guys have, this should be obvious. You say math and history, and again, this is an expression, so this history thing is coming from scope, which we've already defined. And then you can use your template. What's that?
That needs to be on
No, you repeat the item that you're on.
You're repeating the last item.
Not the contents of the element. So yeah, I actually thought that at first too, and it didn't really make much sense until I got things doing different. So we're going to do math.history. We can do, so now with this ngRepeat, we've created a subscope, which is actually shared with the parent scope. So you could render X again if you wanted to, which wouldn't make much sense, or you could render math.description. That would be the best thing for this. So now you've got this. So let me go and implement calculate product so I can show you that bit of magic. And unfortunately, JavaScript overloads plus, so I can't just copy, or I can't just edit replace, find replace. This should be right? Okay. So now we come in here, and both of those should work. So back to the filters. Another filter you could do on an ngRepeat is to filter the elements out. So you could do searching really, really easy with the filter. I'm not going to type that out because I'm not sure exactly how that goes. But I wanted to show you order by. So you can take a simple list and order by a field. And I'm typing inner quotes here, which I'll explain in a minute. So I want to order by the sum, or the results rather. 11 and you get 30 and you get 11 inserted at the top. So does great when ordering. And this is expecting a string because it doesn't necessarily want it. It wants to give you the option of letting your controller dictate how the application should sort of flow. So it's just kind of allowing you to change that elsewhere, which I will demonstrate by moving it. You could say order value, which is now expecting a property on your scope called order value. So let's do real quick and then do this. So we could create a checkbox, rather a radio button, and bind it to order value. Give it a value of description, no, give it a value of result. Say order by result, or we could order by operation to give lowercase, or to give grouping. So what you can see here is, I'm going to actually change that. Now it will dynamically order by the result or the operation, so now it's grouping all products at the top.
So you added order value as a scope option just by defining it in ngModel.
Kind of. So I could see, so by default, you see none of these are clicked. So basically by setting this ngModel attribute, you're saying when the user interacts with that, I want to update this property on my scope. So what you could have done is just come in here and said scope dot order value equals result, and then by default that'll be checked and it will be ordered by default.
So unlike Knockout, you don't even have to define a model.
Right. Yeah, that was kind of the first example I showed, where that first name thing. You can literally write it. You can write everything in HTML. Not ever use JavaScript if you just wanted something silly and simple, either to demonstrate or have like a simple application. Yeah. So another interesting thing is back to that MVW thing. It's kind of whatever you want. You could again set this. So I took order value out of the controller because I don't want him to be even concerned with that. You can use something called ngAnimate, which basically says on initialize, execute this Angular expression, and you can say I want order value by default to be result. So if you refresh that, you get results checked by default. So it really gives you the power to choose how you want things to go as well. Let's do some more dumb stuff. There's also with this order by filter, there's also a way to reverse as well. I can type the word reverse out. So you can come in here with a checkbox and bind it to a reverse property on your scope. And you don't need to set the value. If you're going to use ngModel with a checkbox, it's going to give you true or false, because that's basically what you want. There are other ways to get different values of like 1, 0, depending on this is very good project is going to be. So sum, product, sort by result, and then reverse. It's just like that. So, excuse me. Again, there are other filters. There is the search filter, which makes searching super easy. There is I think there's a skip and a take, which allows you to page everything. A lot of neat stuff that's given to you at the box. So let's do some more stuff. So DOM manipulation, which we haven't really gotten into. I mean, all of this is kind of manipulating the DOM, right? You're adding LIs, and you're changing the contents. Wow. you're changing the contents of things. So this is all DOM manipulation, but not really. It's not anything special. So there's another directive that's super helpful called ngShow, and there's also the reverse ngHide, which will say if the value of the property that it's watching is set to true, it'll show. Otherwise, it'll hide. So we could say that we want to show history, and again, I'm going to throw an ngAnimate on here that
equals true.
You don't want your input inside your H2, do you?
No, I don't. I do. Doesn't matter. My history went away though. What happened to my H2 tag? Give a piece of pizza to the person that figures it out.
Well, you didn't have equals true there first, right? Doesn't matter.
No, I don't have something rooted it. It's back now. That's all I wanted. So you could, I did all that. Thank you. What Gary said. I want to wrap all of this in a div. And all my options and format my code, so it's great. So now we have the whole thing hidden. Great. It's wonderful. It's simple. So to demonstrate that I wanted it to show by default, you could also take this out and say, sort of change your approach and say hide history. So hide when hide history is true. It's going to be the same thing. So it'll be visible by default, and then you can hide it by clicking the checkbox. So that's pretty neat. So let's say you wanted to do some fading. Let's say you think fading's pretty cool. So you come in here and you include jQuery, because jQuery is great at fading things out. And you want to make your own directive because Angular by default does not care for fading. It's not going to help you out with that. That's not true.
Well, then we can't use it.
It's just not going to help you out by default. So we're going to use a custom directive here called fadeShow. Yes, and then we want to define that. So we're going to come back to our module, and we're going to define a directive on our module. And the way to do that is to type fadeShow. And you'll notice that I just typed fadeShow without a hyphen, and that's maybe one of the most confusing things about Angular. Is that it's kind of like the CSS, the way CSS works. You have background dash image when you're defining it in CSS, but when you're setting the property, you type background image capital I. So they just kind of chained onto that. So you'll see I have fade dash show, and in here I have capital S show.
You have the option for that, or, I mean, you don't have the dash, do you?
You could use all lowercases.
If you want a capital here, you have to replace that with a dash lowercase.
Yeah, it's a little weird, but not too bad. That's kind of how all their stuff works. So if you want to it's actually, there's an interesting side effect. If you want to Google for ngModel, it doesn't work too well like that. But because it's actually ngModel, it comes right up. So it's actually a word. It's a phrase. It turns into a phrase, which is an interesting side effect. I'm sure they thought about that when they were developing it. So we want to do something on this fadeShow. So to create a directive, you're going to pass in a function that is going to be kind of the application scope of your directive. And I don't mean to misuse the word scope there. I'm not talking about Angular scope. If you were at the JavaScript talk I did before, we're passing these functions because we want to contain code inside of a block that's not going to be muddled with other JavaScript scopes. That's a poor description, but hopefully you get what I'm talking about. So you want to return an object. The directive is expecting you to return an object. You can use the restrict option to say that I want this directive only to be used for attributes, which in this case I do. I'm not ever going to do like a fadeShow element. So I want it to be an attribute. And there are other options. You can do elements, and I think you could do even combine them like that, so attribute or element. There's also C, which will check for class changes. So if you apply a class to an object, you can check for that, or an element rather, you can check for that. There's also N, I think it's N, which says that you could do a directive around a comment. And I'm not entirely sure why you would do that, but they've got it in there. So
Google does.
There's some brilliant reason. Yeah, so we want to do that, and there's a linking function. So when this,
maybe when you can't control the HTML.
yeah, maybe.
I know that they use it for, like, if you look at the HTML it's still generating, there's lots of comments in there.
Yes, they may be using it internally. Yeah, and so this directive I'm creating now is like any other directive, ngRepeat or ngClick NG model, they have kind of ate their own dog food and used their own directive approach. So any directive you see or use in Angular has been written nearly just like this, which is kind of neat. So if you ever need an example of like how they do that, you can just go check the source code. So when this directive is seen by Angular, the link function is going to get called, and it expects, this is not dependency injection, it is literally expecting or going to provide you a scope, which is the scope of your directive. Could be the parent scope, could be if you've isolated your scope, which is another topic. It's going to pass you the element, which is the HTML element, and any attributes you've defined. So since this function will only be called once, you need to know basically the way we're using it. We're passing a scope property to it. So you want to know what that scope property is, the value of it, and you want to track changes to it. So the way you do that is to watch a value. And real quick, let me show you, this has been extremely helpful. It's basically just to log out scope and attributes. If ever you are writing a directive and you're confused by something, if you log out these things, you can see exactly what they look like. So because this directive is being used inside my ng view, which is here, included by my calculator, or including my calculator, my scope is, as defined here in my routes, calculator controller. So that is the scope I'm given. So if you look here, you can see that this is calculator controller. I have a history, I have an X and Y, I have calculate product, calculate sum. So I have access to all that information. But it would be very silly to write my directive just to watch the variable called show history, because that wouldn't make sense. You couldn't reuse it anywhere else. So if you look at attributes that are passed in, you can see that fadeShow is set to hide history. And that's a string, which may seem weird, but when you're using the watch statement, which I'm about to show you, you want a string. So I could have typed, or actually type the string. We want to watch the value as it changes on the scope. So you're telling the scope to pay attention to this property by doing it, because there's no p goes to p dot, unfortunately. So this is JavaScript. We're using strings here. But again, you don't want to hard code that, so you can do HTRs, which is the attributes passed in, dot fadeShow, which is the name of your directive, because you know that if they're using your directive and they're using it correctly, they're going to assign a value to it, which is that property. So we're going to watch for changes in there. And anytime something changes, we're going to get a new value passed to our callback. And funsies, we're going to say the new value is that. So, right, so it was undefined initially because I didn't default to anything in my controller or my ornament. But every time this ng model fires, we're seeing true, false, true, false, true, false. So because we're using hide history, we're going to say if new value is true, then we want to element.fadeout, awesome, and then else element.fadein. Hopefully that gets cleaned up. Okay. So instead of ng hide now, we have create fading in, fading out. And so this is what I was talking about before in the slides. You really want to separate your business logic from your DOM manipulation. So if you notice, the controller still does not, it's very business logic centered. There's no DOM manipulation in it. There's no weirdness. If you look at your HTML, it's all very UI centric. There's nothing weird in there. You're not setting classes with an expectation that something's going to happen in the background because you set this class. There's no weirdness. It's all straightforward. And if you look at your directives, you know that this is a directive is basically where you want to do DOM manipulation. You never want to do it in your controller. So
now you're totally decoupled from jQuery too in your UI.
Kind of. So I included jQuery, and I should not have. Angular does not need jQuery. It's kind of a crutch. I can imagine there are some ways. I basically included a 90 kilobyte library just so that I could fade out an element, and that's a little ridiculous. So Angular has an approach to that, but it's in the unstable release right now. They just had a release today, but I don't think it's made it in that build yet. So
Should add that for your demo.
What's that?
So we should add that for your demo.
Yes, so we're going to do it. So the first thing we need to do is change out our Angular script. Let me get rid of that. I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm going to include our Angular unstable release, which is 1.1.4. I was on 106 before, they released 107 today. And let me do this from memory. I might have to look at my notes here. Yeah. So we're not going to use the fadeShow directive anymore. We're going to go back to ngShow. I like that spelled show. Bring that up. That makes a little bit more sense. So hopefully that still works. Great. And I'm going to ngAnimate and show that by default. Let's click in it. Alright, so ngShow and the new Angular has this awesome feature, awesome new directive called ngAnimate. And it works on a lot of different elements. I'm going to show you how it works on ngShow and ngRepeat. But it uses, since I said in my subject of my invite, the future of web development, we are going to be using CSS3 animations, which is, again, this is like, animations in JavaScript are, it's again back to tricking the browser. You're kind of, it's not the right place to do it.
They don't agree.
They don't agree.
I'm never going to use this here.
So, separation of concerns, like you said, you want to keep your animation. CSS3 can do animation, it can do it really well, so you want to keep it in there. So you use this ngAnimate directory, and you can say that on show, I want to show fade. I'll explain this in a minute. Probably doesn't make much sense as I'm writing it. Hide fade, I think this is right. I've got some CSS included, which does that. Let's see. Let me check. I can't actually tell. I might have sped it up.
It looks like it was fading just real fast.
It did, yeah, but I couldn't really tell. You can slow it down. I'll show you. In my CSS here, I have my site CSS, and I have a fade show. Yeah, it's pretty fast. This is basically CSS3 animations. I don't want to get into that because that's, I don't understand it. I ripped this from someone else. But it is, I get it, just not enough to talk smartly on it. So all ngAnimate is really doing, which it seems like magic, but when you boil it down, it's just setting a class. So in my app.js, in my calc HTML, I'm saying when show goes, when ngShow is being shown, fires the show event, I want to use my show fade CSS. And when it's being hidden, I want to use my hide. And it takes again, it's kind of weird. It takes a setup, which says that initially I want opacity to be 0, and I want to use this transition thing, which, to get it to work cross-browser, you kind of have to use these at this point because it's not exactly perfect yet. Basically, change the opacity every 0.5 seconds until you get to the, yeah, I don't know. I'm not going to talk through this because I don't quite understand it, but basically it's animating the opacity. But this is fadeShow setup, and this is fadeShow setup. But it's, yeah, so I don't know, whatever. It's magic. Let's just say that it's magic.
So the reason they call it animate though, Langdon, instead of just like set class or something, is so that it can react to different events. Right, because you said in the end all it's doing is setting a CSS class on that element.
Yeah.
Why call it animate instead of like set class? And is it because you have that show and hide or whatever?
No, because it's harnessing the power of CSS3 animations, basically. It is expecting you to animate something. So this
right. But there's nothing saying that's what you're doing in that CSS, right? That CSS could just...
Oh, yeah, it could do anything you want.
So, is that the only way to dynamically associate... Is that how they would recommend you dynamically associate CSS with an element? Is animate? Like, say...
No.
You could call anything animation.
No. So there's a class directive. There's an ng class directive 2, which says that you can dynamically associate, based on your scope, classes with elements. But that's just classes with elements. We're doing animation, and I think
I'm just trying to, I mean, it's very difficult to follow.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to differentiate between something that would be just set the class and then animate.
Yeah, what's the difference between?
Because CSS3 animations, I think you want to, it's not just apply a style and it does it. You need to apply an initial style, which is how you have the setup thing and the start thing. And then when that's done, you need to have like a complete style.
Oh, so like it chains some
I
classes.
believe so, yes. Yes, I believe so.
And if you did that with just setting classes, you'd have to do all that manually.
Right.
Okay.
I'm not entirely sure why, maybe that's the problem. No, because they both have setup and they both have start. Yeah, I believe, setup is say initially do this, let it run, and then maybe somehow it binds to an event that says when it's done, set the opacity to 1. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe, I don't know how CSS animations work.
That's the order that these classes are gonna have.
Yes, and it might just set both of them. It might be that simple that it just sets both of them, I'm not sure. But I don't think that's true because, yeah. Let me show you another one, and then maybe it might click a little bit more, although this doesn't seem to be working. Let me see if I can poke around. I've got the new, let me pull up my working iteration of.
And show and hide in that case, and that object that you're setting to the animate is just built in. Yeah, got it.
What's that?
Fade show, not show fade.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Like Moose might get pizza.
Is there a way to turn on something that might tell you that? Like, is there? It seems like they know, right?
JavaScript.
Well, they don't know. That's the thing. They're just applying styles. They don't know about your CSS. They're
They
not.
would know whether it existed. They could figure out whether.
I don't think so. You can apply a class to anything, even though it doesn't exist.
Okay, that makes sense. They probably don't want to limit you, I guess, because it might exist later or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not
Like
sure.
finding or something.
Yeah. So the other cool thing about animation, real quick, is I'm just gonna actually copy it because that would be.
Or you might just be setting a class to the jQuery to do something with it later.
Yeah.
Not anymore.
Because you can't get out of that mindset.
Oh, yeah.
So the directives themselves, you like that? The directives themselves have to support animation. You can't just slap ngAnimate on something that is not coupled with something else that it supports. So ngAnimate here on ngShow is expecting this object because you want to do something when you show and something when you hide. But if you do ngRepeat and you want it to kind of be really dumb and come into view in a fancy way, you use ngAnimate and it just expects a string again, so you can control this if you like by your controller. So if you saw in my CSS, there was a bunch of slide stuff up here, and so we have setup and start for fade, but for ngAnimate, you have a leave and an enter. So you see if this just worked magically. Hang on. Where is it?
Define
I typed
animate.
it twice.
What should have happened?
It breaks it. It should have happened twice. I'm in the wrong file.
You went to go copy it.
Yeah, buddy, you want to copy it?
Save file.
Look at that, brilliant. So that's one enter. It's a little I believe if I were to,
Can you make snowflakes fall down in the background?
no, you can't do that.
Make something chase your mouse around?
Actually, we don't need to do it in the block. I think, I'm just going to see, there was that leave event as well, so I think if you remove an element from the array, that it would be smart enough to remove it. What's the easiest way to do that? Show history, not history dot splice, the first one. So I'm actually doing the first one. I forget which property's which. Let's see if that works. Nah, it didn't work.
It did.
Okay, so there you go. That's the leave stuff. It's a little bit too quick to see on this, but it is sliding off to the left. So again, more magic. So that's all pretty neat. So let me show you with the last 20 minutes with this kind of a real world example of how this is pretty awesome. So I'm going to pull up there's ngCop for a second. I want to get my email. I don't want that one.
you're on AngularJS, you're on Inspire.
Wait, what?
I'm there once a week.
The bare minimum.
Once a week.
If you want to do the minimum.
Okay, good. Well, that's an option.
Done.
I won't say how many times per week you need to go.
Right.
I have two real world examples. I don't know that I'll be able to get to the second one, but the first one is hide and show categories. So when you're in COP, this is COP. I don't know if anybody's seen it. It's great. There's some categories here. There's some groups here, and there's some units here. But we have a little interface that allows the user to hide these if they don't want to see them. So you just move them over, great, and they're all hidden. Move them all over, it says none of them are visible. Move them all over, none of them are hidden. So to get that to work, unfortunately, it requires all this HTML with Razor sprinkled in there, with rendering these categories, setting the name, setting the data ID, which just it's just kind of weird. We need that later on, which is just not evident. All that HTML coupled with 200 lines of JavaScript, which is kind of insane. And this JavaScript is
100?
What's that?
Only 200?
It could be less. There's some lame stuff in here, but still. So we need to know how to get all the group category IDs, which is kind of crazy. Like if you're thinking about Angular, you just do scope.categories, and there you have them all. We're setting a button state, which is, I'm not going to do that in my example, but whatever. Inserting categories, there's a whole thing here, which you would think, well, that's business logic. You get in here, and it's like, well, that's DOM manipulation. There's all this weird stuff. Insert before, we're inserting things in the DOM. Toggling visibility is kind of the same thing. We're just moving back and forth. I don't even know what that does. It's very long, very crazy. And then when the save button fires, you've got to basically map all the elements on the DOM, just extract the ID out of them. It's just crazy. Absolutely crazy. So let's hop over to Angular, and let's hop over to our categories view and try to knock it out real quick. So what we want to do is create another controller. Controller. Scope.
And the CTRL magic string, that makes sense.
Kind of. You can call it whatever you want.
Oh, you did that.
Yeah, I called it category.
Right.
Here. They recommend CTRL. You can type whatever you want. No matter. And inside of that, did I? I was supposed to make a template to get categories. Everybody can close their eyes for just a minute while I go copy. Oh, you know what I can do? No one can do that.
Nobody's doing it.
I did.
I did. Mine are.
I wanted to be surprised.
Alright, so getting back to my categories, I want to define on my controller scope. I want to define, let's do like a model here. Let's do a categories model kind of thing, subproperty, categories. Here's my mess. Get my brackets right. It's fun when you paste other things. So I want an object that has a hidden property, list of hidden, right. So this is a list of hidden, I don't need objects here, but whatever. This is a list of hidden categories, and this is a list of visible categories. That's kind of what we're going to work off of. Check my stuff out. I think I was supposed to have, I was supposed to have a template in here, but there it is. Oh, I lost it. So I gotta unfortunately break this apart. This demo has been soiled. Let's yeah. Cool. Let's just knock this out real quick. It's supposed to be, this is where you guys are supposed to close out again. Even though I'm just gonna retype this. I'll probably just undo it all. That'll probably be the best way to do it. STD volumes, great. other buckets of categories. Hidden categories, visible categories. We want to first, we want to do an ng repeat like we saw, and we have, what I put it in, category in, capital C categories. Can't type capital. Clean this up for now. Okay, capital C categories, lowercase, visible, and we want to render the name. So we got all that. There's supposed to be some CSS in there. I'm not sure why it's not there. And we want to do the same thing down here, but we want to do it to hidden. So there we go. And it doesn't do anything yet, but it should. So we need to add that. And also these guys are still here. So we can easily hide those with an ng show when categories.visible.link is greater than 0. Equals 0. Thank you.
Catio Dyers.
I blame this keyboard.
Guess it should be Gyres.
So hopefully those should be hidden. And now we need to do some logic. So let's do some logic. We want to say on click of this guy. We want to let's go write that first. Let's go write a lovely method in here. It says when you can hide a category, show a category. Take that category in because we're inside a repeat and we have no context of what they have decided to hide or show. And we want to figure that out off cycle. Is that right? Is that a
syntax that I know?
Is that a squiggly bracket?
Should we scope that hide category?
Yeah. I don't know. I'm trying to type.
I was like, I don't understand at all.
Yeah.
Just make up your own syntax in JavaScript.
Yeah, pretty much.
So, on hide category, we want to take the category from the category scope. Category dot visible. Yes, take it from visible using index of, because God bless JavaScript and your by reference, everything. Basically, find the category. Local variable same as what? Sure. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what I'm writing here. I don't actually. So I actually want to slice the category I just found and remove it from the array, and add it to so I don't know. That's a little fuzzy. That should work. And then show should do the same thing except on the reverse field, like so. Who thinks that'll work? ng click. And we're in visible categories, so we want to put that.
I bet it won't even compile.
I bet it didn't even get to that.
So we want to, so we've got this, go away please, we've got this lovely ng repeat, and whenever you click it, we're going to hide the category on the left, and on the right, we are going to show the category. And hopefully, there we go, it just kind of works. So I have basically replicated the 200 lines of JavaScript and the 100 lines of whatever with about...
With Angular's 2,000 lines.
Right. Let's assume this was loaded properly. You know, like 5 lines of code, which is all business logic again, and a couple lines of HTML. And it's very nice, it's very intuitive. It's a little lame because you could actually change the order, which was one of the bugs. So you see it as just at the end now, and you can go back here, and now you see at the top. That's just kind of lame. So you can easily throw an order by on that. If I can find my ng repeat, and I want to order by let me show another bit of magic, which might be tricky to pull off, but I'll see if I can do it. So because you have this data binding, and because you have these elements tied to these JavaScript variables, Angular grants you something just almost amazing when you're dealing with AJAX requests. So I'm going to pull in another dependency. Another neat, real quick as an aside, another neat feature of WebStorm is that it really helps you type code out. That's a lot of stuff to type, and I just type script : source and hit tab. You can create your own as well. Like if you saw at the beginning, I just did Angular, hit Angular tab. I thought I did an Angular resource, but I don't think I did. Let me make sure this file exists.
He doesn't use resharper. New to him.
True, I don't use resharper. That is new to me. So Angular resource. So this is like a dependency that you can use to really, really help with RESTful service. You know, this SPA idea, single page application, really works well with REST services just to get data. You don't want to get HTML dynamically from the server, like I said, so you need to get data somehow, and via JSON, via REST is a fantastic way to do it. So the first thing you want to do, since it's not bundled with Angular core, but it is written and provided by Angular, is you need to include it as a resource. You need to inject it into your module. You do it like that. I'm not going to get it better, actually, sorry. So coming down here, we want to say that this controller is going to use the resource that is now available because we've A, included it, and B, injected it. And we want to say, this is the thing that I don't know that I can type out. We want to say var categories.
Big shot.
I'm going to do, what's that? I'm going to do a capital there. Let's category service, resource, and you want to give it a URL to your resource. And I've got this is a total hack, not something that you would normally do. I've got a JSON file that's going to represent my payload. Normally you would put a RESTful URL in here, and there's a second option that I'm not going to use, a second argument rather, that I'm not going to use, that you can kind of tell it how to work with it. So if it's a get operation, or a post, or whatever other verb that you can think of in terms of REST, it will support. But for this basic thing here, I'm just going to say that this is my RESTful resource, and I want to use it. So I now have a service. I've just created a service off one line of code. It's wonderful, and I think, again, it's all kind of fresh. So I think I can literally just say scope.categories equals category service dot get. And I think that's all I have to do. So a really neat thing here that wasn't obvious initially is that because of all this data binding and because Angular is participating in watching your scope and monitoring it for changes, you take something that's generally asynchronous and difficult to work in, and just poof, in one line of code, you bound categories from the service or from the server to your HTML. So if you're writing this in jQuery, you do a get, you pass in some stuff, and you get a callback with the data in it, and then once you get that data, you have to do something with it, to modify your HTML. This is, literally that simple, done. It made a request to the server. Oops, that's not what I wanted. So you can see it pulling in the categories and renders them immediately. And it's so quick. So what I could do is something really dumb. Just to simulate some load lag. I could say after a second, I want you to load categories. So there's nothing, and it just loads from the server.
How does that deal with failed requests then?
I don't worry about failed requests. Nothing fails in Angular. yes, real world, you would probably want to do something, I think, much like jQuery. You don't always want to bind to the error callback. You would want to do like a generic error handler to tell your user that, hey, something went wrong. Unless you're going to do something.
I didn't know that that's resource thing. I was using like HTTP.
Yes, and you can use HTTP-GET, but this resource thing is kind of new, and it's an extra dependency that you need to include, but it's extremely powerful, especially if you've got a RESTful service, because it takes care of all the verbs. So I could save categories back to the service, and it would just magically take care of that in like one line of code. And the GET does actually does have a callback, such that when it's done, it will tell you that it's done, and you could do something. But again, this is not. There's a statement that a lot of people use called the Angular way, which is this. When you get into the framework and you use it the right way, you do it the Angular way, and like putting down manipulation in your controller is not the Angular way. Just as doing something after you get data, like then assigning it to categories or massaging the data, that's not really the Angular way. So.
They say that before or after they pull their ascot and the pocket square.
Yes. Yep.
So if you were building that for real Angular, like you were actually putting that in code.
Yep.
What do they call this? There's some bouncy box. What do they call that when you move stuff from the left to the right and back again? Yeah. Bouncy box. Would you write? This is more of an abstract question, I think. But would you write a bouncy box implementation and then tell it to bind to some categories call?
Yes.
Or would you literally write it like you did here, where it's a categories box?
It's up to you.
The Angular way. I know.
Right.
But
that's my first
statement. Is it more pragmatic in that you solve the problem you have? You don't try to create these abstract reusable modules or whatever,
right.
Or do they tend to create reusable modules and then data bind to something, or is there really no recommendation one way or the other?
I think that, I don't know, I've not read a recommendation, but it seems like most people are like, if you're going to get any reuse out of it, make it a directive. So yeah, if I had another hour, then we could spend in here, writing out a bouncy box thing, and we could literally do this. It would maybe take 30 minutes. You could do a bouncy box, and you could say on hide or something, do this, on show, which would be what? Where's my?
Could just say like what selected and not selected, and just bind it to arrays in the model, right?
True. Yeah. If you wanted, but then you're. It's all about how you want to couple it to your model. So my model has not hidden and not visible properties. So you would either want to just have the bouncy box expect that, or have the bouncy box tell it which properties to check.
So say I write an awesome bouncy box and I want to sell it or put it up there or whatever. Is there a way to distribute that kind of thing? Because there's a separation here now, which is cool. How do you distribute a module so that somebody can consume it without having to go edit a bunch of source files or whatever?
There is a
using this type of approach.
There was a site that had
the Grunt. There's a package manager, which Angular uses. I think it's Grunt.
Oh, so you have
But you could get this package.
Basically, links it all together into like a.
Yeah, they do have a
DLL.
Kind of. Yeah, it's more like package manager in
NPM.
Studio.
NuGet.
NuGet. It's more like NuGet. Yes, I don't think they use NPM, but NPM is a great one. It would more just, get this package, it would write to your file system, update this package, it would check your files, check the repository, update your system, just like NuGet does.
So it's still going to have to put all those files in different places.
Yeah.
There's no I imagine there could be some sort of server-side trickery. You could put some module there that would blow it all out or whatever.
Yeah. Yep.
But that's not how you typically.
No, and you're going to want to, because it's going to, at the end of the day, if you're writing this right, like I'm sitting here.
You don't want people mucking around and if you distribute it, say you're trying to do your best to encapsulate it such that all people know is you provide some RESTful URL to get the data for the bouncy box. And you don't want to muck it with any of it.
Yes. You basically would put attributes on your bouncy box element that makes it fully customizable, so that they're not editing the core file.
But in the end, they can still, but they're going to see it. I mean, they still can.
Oh, yeah.
There's nothing.
No, you can obfuscate it, but I mean.
Right. Okay.
It's not the Angular way.
Right.
It's open source after all. We want to see what everybody's doing.
So everything you distribute would thereby be pretty much
Yeah.
open source, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
get a monocle with it too.
I was gonna run
Hypertable in there?
Yeah. I totally wanna redo that.
Alright, well, let me see. Chris is excited about that.
Angular table.
There's another pretty neat, there's another, like, my first aha moment with Angular, God, I wish I could hide that, was writing the unit picker. So if I still have that open, this guy. I'll try to breeze through this. The unit picker itself is 630 lines of JavaScript. It is a jQuery plugin. It requires a bunch of stuff on the server, a bunch of HTML. It's really, I don't know, you write a jQuery plugin, you want it to be distributable, and that's why we wrote it. But there's a lot of requirements, right? So you give somebody the jQuery plugin, you tell them how to use it, they have to write all this code to wire up all these events that are ultimately going to change something on their end. It's not great. So I wanted to see, what this would look like in the Angular way. So when you check these boxes and you get selected units down here, what that looks like and how that works. So I'm just gonna, I wrote the code and I was gonna rewrite it here, but for the sake of time, I'm just gonna show you. Comment like that. Cut this too. So if you look at, let me cut that real quick. So if you look at this, now it works great. We've got a map. We've got a unit, just like this screen over here. We've got a unit picker area and a selected units area. So the Angular promise is that, hey, I could give you a unit picker directive. And you could say, all right, well, here's your unit picker. Here's how you use it. You say selected units, and you would bind it to your, sorry, let me set this up before I start talking.
Didn't even wait for you to do the tag.
I know, it just doesn't care. It doesn't care.
Come on, let's go.
So I'm going to say, here's the unit picker package, and it would pull in the directive, and it would pull in the service that would be required to pull the data, pull the JSON off the server. And you would probably want to modify the service or configure something in your app.config function to set that up. So, this is awesome. Like if I was going to give somebody the unit picker to reuse, I would love to give it like this. They just type a unit picker tag, and they bind selected units to this variable over here. So the other cool thing is that because the unit picker is a directive, and I've created this unit picker tag, inside of that, which is, I can send the code out. It's a lot to take in. But there's basically a simple template, which kind of renders it off. Again, I cannot hide this thing. So you can see that this is the template that drives the directive, or that the directive uses. It takes in, or it uses rather, category elements. It uses group elements. So there's this very nice logical language. Again, like the tabs example from the slide. You do tabs and panes. Here you're doing a div. Sure, you're doing a category element, a group element, and a unit element. It's just very nice. So when you get back to here and you're like, well, when they click on a unit, I want to show, stop doing that. I want to show these units in the selected units area. You don't want to do that on an event, right? That's not really the Angular way. You want to do that through magic, of course. So I came down here and I had a moment where I was like, wow, I could just use a unit element and I could bind with an ng repeat unit in selected unit. That's still not bug and lie edit. And I could say unit tag wants a unit object, so you can give it that. And on, let's say, unit check, I want to remove links unit, pass the unit that we're removing, and then I don't even think you need to put a name.
You just removed unit. Did you want to do that?
Past tense. Save the demonstration. So now when you're doing this, through this two-way binding where we've said, hey, I want selected units to be bound to this, and let me do that sweet JSON trick, JSON curl. You can see how it's just all bound there, just automatically. And then, because because I've bound to this unit check and I'm calling remove, I remove it here, and because I've written my directive to watch this selected unit thing, I know when things get removed, so it removes from both.
That's crazy. So it's wiring them up to be dynamically, you need to write events.
Exactly. Yeah, this whole event-driven thing.
Reevaluating it. What? How does it know to reevaluate unit in selected, like the selected units?
So I use that,
Is it doing events internally probably, or?
No.
Or you would never?
Well, kind of. So of course, I have to bind the on-click event of this, and I have to know when the user checks it.
Is it like an observable thing on this? Like, when that collection changes, it knows to rebind?
Yes. Yeah, that's how this works. So when I uncheck something here, I'm literally removing an item from an array down to my guy here, which he is also wired up to. And the way that it works the opposite direction is that he's using that $watch thing to watch for changes in this, and then says, oh, you removed something, let me update my kind of view of it. So yes, the directive is difficult to write, but using it is really beautiful and very simple.
Right.
So let me wrap up my slides, because I got a sweet Angular's awesome thumbs up. And some resources here. So the website's that, the docs are that. The docs are not perfect. They're not great. They're getting better. They've actually open sourced the documents based on user feedback. So anybody can edit them, and actually it's all on Git. So when you make a pull request to make changes, your pull request is invalid unless you also change the documents to reflect the things that you changed, which is great. So now the code matches the documentation straight from the mouth of the author. So that's kind of cool. There's a great question on Stack Overflow. How do I think in Angular if I have a jQuery background? That's got like 1,000 upvotes. It's really well written. I recommend reading it if you have any interest in this.
Kind of weird your jQuery background.
I know.
Well,
if you spend all 6
you were
months
raised in elementary school doing jQuery.
It's been around for a while. But I cannot.
Not long enough to have a background in it, but maybe.
I cannot say enough nice things about Stack Overflow. It's a fantastic learning resource, and I've answered questions on there before, and I've asked questions on there before, and it's fun answering things, and it's fun troubleshooting other people's problems and seeing what they're working on. But to learn a new technology, I didn't realize how wonderful it would be to go in there, because I wrote something. I wrote a little simple video application for my son with Angular. It was very dumb, and I couldn't think of a better thing that I would get value out of to write. I didn't just want to write something dumb. So I come with a couple demos of my own just to learn it. But getting on Stack Overflow and checking out this tagged page, anything tagged AngularJS, and seeing like the real world problems that people are dealing with really opens your eyes to, how's that problem solved? How's this problem solved? Because that's what you always get into. Like, yeah, the framework's great. Yeah, you showed me this calculator application. It's all well and good. Well, great. I have this real problem. How do I do that? It seems pretty complex. So it helps me, answering people's questions helps me get a better understanding of Angular. And there's also, finally, an Angular UI project, which takes Twitter's Bootstrap, and wraps all the nice things in Angular, so you can use them in the Angular array. Yeah, it's pretty sweet. I thought there was a better example on here.
It's being rendered with CSS3.
Yeah, they don't have super nice examples. They just take it to GitHub.
So where does Angular fit juxtaposed with the, what's that group of stuff that Microsoft, that stack of JavaScript stuff that's all thrown
Yeah,
together?
hot towel.
Yeah, whatever it is.
Durandal.
Yeah, didgeridoo, yeah. Is it a competitor for? Because ultimately, I don't think for us it's going to be significant unless Visual Studio adopts it and makes it part of the, right? If it's in
Well, there's nothing to adopt. I'm using WebStorm because I like WebStorm over 2010.
Right.
2012 is great. I mean, 2010 you can't even collapse JavaScript in. So 2012 has that. If I had Visual Studio in 2012, I would have been using that, but WebStorm's great. So there's no requirement. I can imagine there's something on NuGet. You want to say GitHub? There's probably something on NuGet where you can pull Angular into your project.
Right. But it's like, imagine there was a competitor for jQuery that you liked more. Would you use it in your job today? No, because jQuery pretty much comes with a web project in Visual Studio now.
Dude, no way. No.
What do you mean?
I'm not the person that just take what's given to me. Like, here's web forms. Web forms is a project. Use web forms.
Right. It would be an uphill battle to argue for not using jQuery right now.
It would be an uphill battle on a team of peers, but that's why I'm doing this, to get people excited. So Dave's pretty excited, so I wanted to get more excitement going.
But hypothetically, there's a competitor for jQuery that you like more, and you're going to try to convince all of us not to use jQuery, right? So it's going to be pretty difficult.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So what I'm getting at is, for some reason, a lot of people might think that Angular isn't the way to go for the Microsoft stack.
Absolutely.
I don't know what this is. I have no clue what this is. I know nothing about this stuff. But it's going to be hard for me to commit to. I mean, you know a lot about this and clearly have learned a lot of stuff, like with a dictionary kind of recall, and that takes some time.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah, without question.
If I spend time learning how to do like some JavaScript library, I'm going to default to doing where Microsoft is going if I'm going to continue being a Microsoft type developer.
Sure.
So if you are the CTO of Nova Systems, and you know that what gets written now will probably be on some server for 10 years.
I invited him to the meeting, by the way. He probably already hung up.
He did.
He did accept. That guy. Yeah.
Is this, in your mind, the direction to go? Do you know enough about the other ones to know that this is better than them?
So it's pretty funny.
This is really more of a personal question. Like,
yeah, no, and
I spend my time.
I mean, you know me. I don't want to just force opinions on people. I try to base my opinions on logic and not just like, oh God, I'm excited about this. Oh, I don't like Microsoft. Like, oh, well, Google, they do great things.
But in Microsoft's defense, the other JavaScript libraries aren't actually Microsoft. It's just
they're not. Well, they kind of are. So that's the thing. So Angular is written by software developers. Those software developers happen to be at Google, and they are well respected within Google. So now Google is kind of backing it. They're kind of saying great. But Google also has developers, I believe, who wrote Backbone, which is a competitor, just like Knockout's a competitor. Knockout happens to be written by a guy at Microsoft, and whether Microsoft is
included in Visual Studio now?
I think, yeah, there's a template. There's that hot towel template. Maybe 2012 includes it. I don't know.
I thought that I saw it included with all the JavaScript.
Yeah. But I mean, at the end of the day, you make a decision. Do I want to use what's in my project default or what's not? And you make that decision. And that's, so the first thing I did after
you do, but
JR.
strategically developers, I mean, every individual developer is going to make that decision. It's kind of like a...
Yeah, of course.
You've also got to understand that if it's only going to be included through Visual Studio, these things change every month now.
Right.
There's a new freaking JavaScript thing every other month.
I know, and that's why I'm asking this.
You can't just say, okay, does it come with Visual Studio? Because you're going to wait 2 years for that.
Well, I think his point is that it comes with the Visual Studio, therefore it probably works well with the Microsoft ecosystem.
Their ecosystem is going to lend itself.
Yeah.
Their controls.
And sure, it does, but AngularJS, all it needs is a RESTful data backend, right? And Web API, that's what that is,
right.
And they're the perfect fit, I think.
Right.
So I don't think you're missing out on anything by not using Knockout, not using Sammy, and whatever else is included in Didgeridoo, Randall.
I think the root
wet towel didgeridoo stuff.
I think the root of the question is, when you look at it at the level that you're talking about, Cameron, is what is the supportability of these components? So if we go to AngularJS, and it's an open source, and you see this a lot in at least Java open source, I'm not sure about Microsoft open source. There's a project, I think Hibernate did this at one point, and the people working on it have a disagreement on the direction it should go, and now it splits and forks and goes down different paths. So if we lock into, let's say, AngularJS, and then they decide to fork, and what's the supportability? What features are going to be supported? Because that's ultimately the question that we have to deal with from an IA standpoint and all the policies is anything you get, the government wants it to be supported. And then if there's a bug, they want to know if they're going to get it fixed. You know, they can push priority to get this bug fixed. Sure. That's why a lot of times they don't like it.
I heard it differently, though. I heard it more like all these JavaScript frameworks are different stocks that you might invest in. And the question is, which stock makes the most sense to invest in? And we know that jQuery's got the backing of this corporation, so its stock is naturally going to inch up. So if that stock's got that backing, it seems like kind of an obvious investment, but, if Angular can do some really cool stuff, it might be a little bit of a tougher sell to say, well, even though it doesn't have that corporate backing, we really think this stock is going to go up, so let's all invest in it, and then, who knows what happens. So what's the argument for investing in Angular, given that jQuery has the backing of a corporate sponsor?
But they're not mutually exclusive, right? They don't really.
No.
Okay, but you're just using that again.
Yeah.
Okay.
It seems like,
Like knockout would be.
I think the issue probably Hot Cow versus Angular, or there's a couple others that are more an attempt to put together a comprehensive framework for an SPA. And so the question is, what's the advantage of Angular over its competitors as sort of comprehensive frameworks?
Sure.
In the context that you're a Microsoft shop and you're going to be fighting an uphill battle, if they put a competitor in their website template, you know what I mean? So you're automatically.
Yeah, but I don't think
so
Microsoft
Angular. If you go to the MVC SPA template page, I do think they have an Angular.
Okay.
And I think you also need to look at roadmaps for these things. What direction do they seem to be going in now? They may be going in, similar directions as far as sort of feature sets. Are they going to be?
So something really interesting, I've watched a bunch of talks on Angular, and the guys work at Google, rather, so, there is that corporate backing. Something really interesting that they said, I think it was even last year, is that they have this data binding through ngModel, and because they are at Google and because they have the ears of the Chrome developers, they are actually getting, data-driven. Anyway, they're getting the binding worked into the browser, so they want that data binding by default in the browser. So I believe they're working on the spec now. They have a team at Google that, I guess, talks with the spec writers and tries to push these technologies. Yeah. Or just, right, HTML5 spec probably, maybe it's HTML6. So they are actually pushing towards getting that data binding natively supported.
So you wouldn't even need a library. You wouldn't include a
Right.
JS library. You just write a tag and boom.
Yeah, much like how this phosphate thing came along. There was no way to do single page. There was no navigation of single page application without this hash hack. So phosphate came along in HTML5, solved that problem. So, it seems like the HTML guys are really reacting to what the community is doing, and data binding is really hot right now with Knockout and Angular. So it seems like something that they would definitely add. And then Angular would certainly adapt to that and strip out all their binding code and just kind of use what the browser offers and wrap their directive system around that.
I would expect all of them would do that, though.
Yeah, and they should, whether they do that, I don't know.
That's where I think the roadmaps come into play, because let's say they say, okay, well, this version of Angular, we dropped that, and it has some other features that you want to enhance. You may not be able to, depending on how they do it, because in our scenario, it's for, browser versions that go back 2 or 3 versions, if not
Sure.
So that's what I'm saying. But I think you run into that on any of.
Yeah, jQuery right now just released 2.0, where they've dropped support for, I believe, IE 6, 7, and 8. And then even their latest offering of 1.9 doesn't even work well with IE 7. So you have to go back to 1.7.2. Despite saying they work well, there's some really weird problems. So as technology changes,
that's what I'm really looking for. What do I invest, like Chris's investment analogy? My time is very valuable to me these days.
Yeah.
And I want to have your mastery of this, but I'm afraid to commit because I don't know enough about the other ones or which way Microsoft's going to go.
So you let the industry do it first.
I would say you invest in the JavaScript mutual fund.
Yeah, there you go.
If you learn JavaScript, you're not going to have problems picking these things.
I don't know. It seems like there was a lot of. I think you could know JavaScript and not know what the hell.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but you don't have.
Absolutely agree.
You don't have.
Well, I feel like I know JavaScript pretty well, but then you get into the whole
do all of this with JavaScript, though. That's kind of that's the whole point.
Yeah, but there's stuff that you have to know that this word has
you
to be
stack on
typed here.
top of that the revealing module pattern. If you really go with that's not really JavaScript core, right? It's more like, and then this makes more sense if you understand that, and it's just like stacking all these things on each other.
But you're just learning those concepts, then you don't have to learn
right.
the whole background of JavaScript.
So back to the time thing, yes, I wrote my first Angular thing back in December, and I wrote it totally wrong, and it was looking back on it now, knowing all that I know, it's a little bit silly. There's some things that are silly. But after JR's talk on Knockout, I was like, all right, I should probably, you know, I
You don't want to do this. What else is
right. I didn't like the observable thing. It was just really weird, and I didn't like putting 15 statements in an ngBind attribute. It just didn't really speak to me. Oh, geez, data bind. So the first thing that I did was, well, let me go figure out what Knockout's about. So Knockout has this great tutorial. I think it's tutorial.knockout. Anybody? Good Lord. All right, whatever. There's a tutorial. Just trust me.
Isn't it .com?
Probably.
Tutorial number 2 done in Angular.
So yeah, exactly. So what I did is I took the first Knockout tutorial and I wrote it all in this JS fiddle, and it's great. So you can see here, there's HTML here. You've got the data bind thing, value equals first name. So we're binding the value attribute to the first name, last name. This is kind of like my example. So, and also, you know, another thing about Knockout as you type, it doesn't update, so you have to blur. So that's kind of lame. I'm sure there's a thing that you can change to get it to work like that. Go caps changes, or rather calls capitalized last name, and that's a string. That's like a statement. It doesn't indicate that that's actually a function, even though it is. So it didn't speak to me as a developer, Knockout. So I got in here and I learned it, and I did the tutorial, and I was like, well, how do you do this in an Angular way? So again, you have all of this. Wow, that is totally different. Sorry, that was number 2. This should be number 1. Again, you have all of the HTML. You simply bind ngModel to first name. There's no value. It just kind of works as is. You do the get full name thing, which I probably should have kept the other one open. Right, so they're binding the text of the strong element to the full name, whereas the templating system is awesome. I think templates like Razor, you know, if anything, shows how great templates are, going from a web forms world to an MVC world where you have these really powerful templates. And then, again, ngClick makes a lot more sense rather than data bind click colon capitalized last name. You're actually calling a function. You can tell you're calling a function. And you have a test controller here, which, you know, defaults to last name, first name, and doesn't even work. That's awesome.
Yeah, you changed your framework.
Did I? Still not working. Doesn't work in IE9. Sorry, guys. Console here. Yeah, I should probably open that in Chrome so I can actually whatever. We don't need to figure it out. Maybe I updated it.
To go back to the other question about, you know, the Microsoft supported Durandal, blah blah blah, right? All this stuff is composable. I've actually watched a video from a pretty .NET specific guy, Ward Bell, and he used Angular with another one of the Microsoft supported JavaScript frameworks for data access called Breeze.js, which is part of Durandal.
That's for getting data, right?
Right, and it's kind of like EF, but for JavaScript. And so I get the argument of, you know, hey, it's included, but at the same time, you know, they're just pieces, and they're supported in that they're given prominence, and they might have some people who contribute, but not directly, right? There's no team.
I don't think, actually in Microsoft, in kind of world, everything seems to be, there doesn't seem to be any push towards one comprehensive framework. So even if you look at like the hotels thing, it's just basically John Papa's going, okay, here's what I think the best of breed.
He's not even a Microsoft guy anymore.
Right.
Yeah, that's the cool thing about Microsoft. They're going, I mean, the Microsoft of old would say, here's what we offer, use this. The Microsoft is new, especially with NuGet, is saying here's all your options, look at all these great things that you could do, choose which one you like.
That's true for Microsoft, but what about for Innova Systems? And
who cares about
the question
Gary?
yeah. I mean, and the question there is, you know, especially with all the businesses on, you know, competitive teams and everything is, you know, there's a lot of business advantage to being able to move people around in order to be able to most effectively compete on price and different projects and so forth.
Sure.
And it seems to me like if there's the number of possible permutations of combining these things is enormous. And if you look at like the difference in data binding between, you know, say what Angular's doing and what Knockout's doing, that's pretty significant, especially take a junior programmer and flop them from one to the other and want productivity out of them in short order. So there might be significant business advantage in settling on, you know.
But do you really want to stifle creativity like that?
That's what I was gonna, I mean, that's literally what I was gonna say. That's, you can't choose technology based on ease of use. I mean, that seems to me to be ridiculous. I'm not the business owner, I'm not worried about money.
I'm talking about
Ease of
next week, okay?
No, he said that one may be easier to get spun up on than the other.
Consistent. So he's saying you leave one project and go to another.
But he also said get spun up on, right?
Only because you have to change.
Right, what I'm saying is that business considerations have to take,
Sure.
you know, consideration. We all want to eat next week, right? We all want
So
to.
define the framework that allows us to innovate and have consistency before defining standards.
Yeah, because in the end, I mean, there's nothing you can't do. It seems like there's nothing you cannot do in one. You can do in the other, you can't do in. And you know, there's no, like, when you say innovation, you implemented a bouncy box in two different frameworks. The innovation is the way that user interface works, really. And the maintenance is a nice thing to have, and the way you did it in Angular was way more maintainable, obviously, in the end. You know?
Yeah, that's the thing that drew me with what you said. That choosing to standardize on, as an example, Angular versus Knockout has nothing to do with a developer's creativity and stifling that creativity. It's syntax and framework.
Okay, then it's just syntax, doesn't matter what we choose.
I
can argue this both sides.
No, we're saying innovation is not a good argument to decide which one to go on. That's all he's saying.
So I'm saying syntax isn't a good argument.
Consistency is what we're saying is way more important than the ability to.
Okay, so we just use plain JavaScript.
What's your point? I don't understand what your point is.
My point is, yes, there may be nothing that we're currently aware of that you can't do with one or the other.
Well,
So it's a consistency of
there is though. Angular is fully featured. Knockout is just data binding, requires other.
Sure, but just pick two
Sure, okay.
of the exact same thing, right? That do the same thing. jQuery versus Angular, for argument's sake, right? My argument is for ease of use, right? For the support in the community. I don't have long because I have a meeting right now, but and trying new ways of doing things that may be easier to maintain over time, right? That kind of innovation, as it were, that the ability to bring in new technologies or new approaches to these technologies, if we just pick one and say, we need to be consistent, so this is what it is, the end, we might as well pick the most basic thing that there is and not use any of them.
I think, and also if you're going to say, okay, we're going to pick this, then there's no point in anybody trying anything else.
No, I think
because we're not going to be able to include it.
Well,
I
if that were the case, we would be having this
a balance
conversation.
that allows for the opportunity for things to be tried out and new things to go on. But there's a median here between the Wild Wild West, where every individual is out trying out anytime they want any technology there is out there, which I would suggest might be good for them, but isn't probably good for the business. And the locking it down where nobody can ever experiment or try, something new and learn maybe there's something better out there now that we should all start migrating towards. So I think we can strike a balance there.
I think we've done a pretty good job of that already.
Yeah, to sort of emphasize what Chuck was saying here.
You got no guys when it comes to that.
On the last project I was on, we had about, I want to say 10 teams of 5 developers, and they were all doing Scrum, Agile, the teams would just build up and everything else. The problem was everybody was going about and doing sort of this Wild Wild West thing. They were all saying, well, I know this technology, so I'm going to use this. And I know this. We're all doing the same. We're building a web app. We had an architecture. We said to them, no one would follow the architecture to because they wanted to do things the way they're used to doing, or the way that they thought. So that meant that we had 3 versions of technology that we're using to do UI. I forget. One team was using Spring, another team was using Git, another team was using this other thing. And the problem is we could never get any of the layers and tiers to work together very cleanly. It was impossible. So I think sort of what you're saying here, Chuck, is striking that balance. And okay, we find a new technology, that's great, but you need to find the right time to upgrade or migrate to it, not just saying, oh, I found this technology, let's switch over to this now. We have 5 modules that are in this one technology, we have 2 that are in this other technology, and then we have a 3rd one that's in this technology, all within the same sort of solution or project that we're working on. Does that sort of encapsulate what you're saying? I think there's a time to do some upgrades and do some migrations and do planning for that and go forward and reap those benefits. It's just that you can't just keep jumping around. I'm not saying that that's what you're doing.
No, I totally agree with you.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
That's what I think the crux of the argument is.
Yeah, but I mean, I think we all, I don't know, I mean, it seems like we all at least, I don't know what you guys are exactly doing, but when you start a new project, and I'm talking Visual Studio project that is going to have X amount of, or I should say solution, X amount of projects within, keeping that consistent is great. I don't know if I mean, if we tried to keep all solutions consistent since the dawn of time, we would still be on 1.1 and web forms, and we would never get anywhere. So I think keeping it on a solution-by-solution basis is great because it seems to, hey, we can try out these new technologies, we can see what works, we can see what's right, what's wrong.
But I think you also need to take into account the overarching project that you're on. So let's say Thursday could be upgrading to use AngularJS, and they can upgrade the modules that they identify to use AngularJS. But Thursday may not be there. We may still be doing MVC4.
Sure.
And the thing is that if we just all of a sudden started jumping over on this new project under DirectX to use AngularJS, we get to a situation which we're actually in now, but it's for a different reason. It's because how old some of these projects are. You start to get projects within DirectX, UI projects within DirectX, where they're using different technology, and that's where I think Chuck, you had mentioned.
Yeah,
you have a junior developer and he comes in, he's working on one, and he jumps over and
I don't think it's a theory. I think that those systems has suffered greatly over the last 10 years because it lacked the flexibility to provide the most value to its customer. And it lacked that flexibility because we had so much software that was locked to a certain set of individuals who had developed that software.
So let's say that, like, I totally get that and I totally agree. But I think it's, let's say we're going back to eSource, we're all on 1.1, 2.0 at the time maybe. I mean, where would we have gotten if we stuck with that? Like, at what point do we change?
That we don't,
try things out?
I say we all go forward in the same direction as opposed to staying in one place.
Right, and that there's some, it's a matter of degree, right? It's like you don't have every sub-project and every project all the time, trying out something new. There's some limit on it, we have to strike a balance between delivering value now to the customer and preparing for the future by trying out things that'll provide more productivity in the future. What that split is at 80-20 or 90-10 or 70-30, I'm not sure, but there's some sort of portion of the effort that does need to be trying out new things.
And then once you find a new direction that you want to go in, I'm not sure here, but where I was in the past, what we do is we start to write up migration plans. In this time frame, we're going to move over to these modules, use that next technology, and until you fill up that backlog and things get, up there. And it's not just a wholesale, everything's got to move over there. The migration plan would say, we'll do this in iterations or steps where we move pieces over.
I guess the ultimate problem that I have with that, and if Durzen were here, maybe Mike can help out, could attest to it, is that code is not the hard part. The hard part of the problems is the underlying architecture. Chris and I and Monique basically rewrote eSource in a span of 3 weeks. by padding the iteration. And we got out from this old, MVC pattern, was it? I can't even remember.
MVC-like, viewer
viewer framework. Yeah. I mean, we totally rewrote the application to be more maintainable in a couple weeks, and I don't think it affected anybody. I don't think it hurt Fred. I don't think it hurt any customers. I know Durzen. I know Durzen just got through with a rewrite. I'm not sure how long it took or what it did. Longer than it should have. But I mean, I personally, if we as an open systems do what we say we do and hire A players, rewriting code and getting spun up on new frameworks should not be difficult. But I mean, the reality of it.
The reality right now is that we're going to be hiring the lowest cost, new people. So by definition, for the foreseeable future, the people we hire will be less experienced. Well, they may be A people, but they won't be people who can command a high salary at the moment.
Sure.
And
they won't have that breadth of knowledge that will help them hop between frameworks.
Right. And I agree that we need to rewrite things, we need to change, we need to advance the technology. I think if we look at what we've got now with eSource, though, there's no way we could rewrite it without causing probably lots of bugs that would take many months to recover from.
As in DiRSS?
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
So, again, I come back to, I don't think that going one extreme or the other is a good idea. I'm not, but I think the question on the table right now is that this move towards a more whether you call it single-page app or client-centric or what kind of name, there's no good name for it that's really descriptive. But in my mind, there's no doubt there is a sea change occurring, and that there is a real move, and we as a company have to get on board with it, whether we like it or not, frankly. And so the tough question now is not are we going to change, but what are we going to change to? And the real issue here that is, okay, is Angular, what are its pros and cons? What does it bring to the table, relative to its many competitors in this arena? And why should we pick it and not, some of these other alternatives?
This is kind of a moving target too, because they're all kind of changing, like and evolving.
As an
They're influencing each other, so it's almost like it's probably too soon to make a decision.
The JavaScript's in a weird place right now.
Yeah. But I think, it's one of those times where competitively, you don't want to, I don't think it's a good idea. I know there's a lot of risk involved, but personally, I don't think it's a good idea to just say, step back totally and say, I'm going to wait till the dust settles before I do it, because I think it then puts us behind the power curve. Okay, the dust finally does settle. We go, okay, we're on board now, but we're way behind our competitors.
There's another thing we can do too, because you gotta.
In our industry, I don't think that's a huge thing.
I mean, we don't always have to bank on just one solution, though. I mean, we could opt in to take a couple of solutions. Maybe the two highest probable winners, and that way you're positioned to have a higher, higher percentage of being on the.
Whichever one wins, you've got an expert on board.
Yeah, we have knowledge in those, and we've had that. I mean, so there's always that sort of option as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be, well, we have to pick Angular, or we have to pick Knockout plus whatever else does the other Angular stuff. It could be, we're going to do some stuff in Angular, and we're going to do some stuff in Knockout plus this. Maybe we do them on, maybe DiRSS picks, Knockout and whatever, and Durzen does Angular, and stuff like that. I mean, there's always those options too, until things do start to settle, and then you can make a more finite decision once things settle, but you haven't stopped yourself from saying, well, we're not going to go forward until we see, what happens with these decisions here.
The problem, one of the data points though that you mentioned that you take into account is the probability of widest adoption, and that seems difficult, if not impossible, to measure. That's the problem. I mean, if we knew that, then the decision would be fairly obvious.
Well, I think there's more than just, I mean, if I were to look at this, I think that would be, looking at the community that's wrapped around these things, but looking at maintainability. Because when you're talking about development and our customer base, the most money spent is not on development, but it's on maintainability. So check that 20% on development, 80 on maintainability. That's going to be a huge factor in these sorts of things when you're looking at them. But there's going to be several other factors as well.
It's like we need a lamb.
Well, you really
Right now, I guess my biggest concern with Angular would be, and this is more gut feel from, limited exposure, is that it is more unique, more.
Right, that's kind of what I was thinking. It's like there's no decoupling yourself at all.
Right. So there's a lot of these, like Durandal or whatever, or Durandal, I can't hear what you said. It isn't, it isn't that different from several other ways of doing your JavaScript libraries and frameworks. And it seems to me that Angular is more radical in it. It sort of owns it. So I think that would be more of a big bet, right? I think you can bet on some of these other ones. If we said, okay, we're going to do hot towel, and next month, Papa says, no, I changed my Mountain Dew should go in or whatever. It's probably not a big deal. But I don't think it'll be, what I've seen, it's very easy to say, oh no, turns out this same sort of thing with my
Oh yeah, I mean, that's right.
But the other side of it, when I think of Angular does turn out to be a good idea.
I mean, yeah, that's what I think.
It could be a big savings from maintainability. Right. Well, too, as far as from what little I saw here, you actually have a true,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's,
That's